Hello and welcome to another episode of Just Bringing Podcast Interviews. My name is Dan, and today's guest is WXW's newest addition to their English commentary team. He's been a commentator in independent wrestling for over a decade. You can listen to him calling the action for Defiant, WCPW, GWF, NGW, WrestleGate, and many more. He's got matches alongside Matt Striker, Stu Bennett, James R. Kennedy, and also he was the host of the old WrestleTalk TV on Challenge TV, and he's now writing for their magazine. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Bradshaw, how are you doing?
Wow, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I was looking forward to this, and I'm happy you are here, and I'm happy you are part of WXW commentary now.
Yeah, I'm happy too. It's been really fun so far. We're partway into this new season of We Love Wrestling, and I'm getting to see quite a lot of new talent. Because WXW is focusing on a new generation of talent coming through, and we're really seeing, I think, just who the next big stars are going to be in the next few years. So I'm excited to be part of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential now in WXW. Some very new faces I also have never seen before, and some from France, some from Hungary, and I'm honest to God, I believe there's quite something in there. There's new people from Germany as well, like Rod and Flot,
hmm
and I believe there's much potential in there. And I guess if you are watching it now, you're rewarded later on because I believe these guys are going to stick around and do some big things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been fortunate that I've obviously the UK has been pretty good for a few years. So that there's quite a lot of the top guys on the UK indie scene who people know about. But I've been doing commentary in Europe, in Hungary, and in Germany for 2 or 3 years now. So I've kind of got to see some of those up and coming talents from continental Europe, who I think a lot of people in my country aren't aware of. And so, some of the ones we're seeing now, like, Peter Tihonyi, you're going to see on We Love Wrestling. He's from HCW, Hungarian Championship Wrestling. Rotten Flot, I've commentated on Mikhail Schenkenberg, who's half of that team before. I think Nikita Charisma, the other half of that team,
Yes.
has incredible potential as well. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys. The French guy, Senza Volto, I know very well. He's been doing some stuff with Aigle LeBlanc now in WXW, so we'll see how that goes. But there's so much talent in the European scene that it's going to be very, very competitive, I think, to see, obviously with a limited number of spots on any WXW card, who can earn the right to get that kind of exposure on that platform.
Of course, and there's always the big dog, I would say, at the top of the pole for quite some time now, Bobby Guns. He's holding that championship tight, and it's the big question is now for next week, who is the number one contender to that title?
Yeah, and I think it speaks to just, again, how competitive WXW is right now, that there are 3, 4, 5 guys you could think of who have a pretty credible case to be named number one contender. But, whoever it is going to have a tough job, because Bobby Guns has, as you say, he's had the title for, I think it's over 450 days now. It's the longest title reign since that championship was created over a decade ago. So it's going to be whoever is the number one contender is going to have a hell of a job on their hands, I think.
Absolutely, he's exploiting any weakness. He's a student of the game. He really is.
Oh, he is. Yeah, I met him. He did a show for WrestleGate in the UK back pre-pandemic, back in the good old days, in like 2019. So I've commentated on him once before, but yeah, seeing him and seeing just how dominant he's been in WXW is pretty impressive.
I believe at 16 Carat last year, yes, a friend of mine gave him a book about wrestling history, and he was like pretty excited because
Mhm.
he's that kind of guy that he likes that old wrestling tradition, and he gets a lot of joy getting all this information of ancient wrestling culture, and I believe that's what makes him stick around and what drives him as well. And what the question is for you now, how did you get into the wrestling business? How did you end up with all of us crazy people?
I've been a fan since I was about 8 years old. Actually, we were just talking before we came on air, weren't we? I was at SummerSlam '92 as a kid, like I was 9, so that was in my first year or two as a fan. And then once you see the British Bulldog win the Intercontinental title and 80,000 of your countrymen go insane around you, that's pretty influential for a 9-year-old. So I was kind of always gonna stick around, I think. And then I didn't really get involved in wrestling, not properly at least, until after university, and I'd done student radio at university, so by then I kind of knew a bit about broadcasting and stuff, and I wanted to keep doing some broadcasting, even though I wasn't at the time going to be doing any in my full-time job. So I thought, well, maybe I could turn my hand to wrestling, and that's how I contacted a couple of promoters around London where I was living, about oh, do you need a commentator? And then a couple of them said, oh, not right now, but might do in a few months. And then soon enough, I had an audition for one of them and was able to get behind the desk. And then it was kind of onward from there.
Wonderful. I believe most people pre WXW and pre GWF, I would say know you from Defiant or What Culture Pro Wrestling as it was known before. Did you have any favorite matches or even match types that you called in your time there?
Oh, I mean, loads. It was such a fun time, and it was so exciting. It happened so quickly as well because people forget sometimes that promotion only started in the summer of 2016, and by October 16 was when they were having these huge shows in arenas with ice rinks. They were with like 2,500 people. We had Cody Rhodes, we had Kurt Angle there, Bret Hart, obviously in a non-wrestling capacity, but he was there. So many of these incredible guys, the Young Bucks, then a little bit later on, and then into 2017, we did this Pro Wrestling World Cup with 64 guys from all around the world. That's how I first got into German wrestling, actually, because there were some German guys on there, and then I went on to commentate for GWF in Berlin off the back of that World Cup. So yeah, it was huge for everyone, huge for me. And I think one of the main things I really like about looking back at it is how obviously it didn't last in the end, which is sad. It went out of business after just 3 years, but its legacy, I think, will be that it did a tremendous amount for a lot of talent who've now either signed for WWE, NXT UK, AEW. Gabriel Kidd, I think, is a classic example of someone who really had his name made by being in WCPW and Defiant, and now he's obviously doing great things in New Japan. So there's a lot of people who have a lot to thank that promotion for, and I include myself in that.
Well, yeah, it's skyrocketed out of nothing. Suddenly it was there, and then yeah, it was like there was a buzz around it. It reached to Germany, I can tell you that much. And
Mhm.
it wasn't only the fly-ins like Kurt Angle and you mentioned Gabriel Kidd. Of course, he was one of the cornerstones of Defiant, I'd say. But there was also Joe Hendry and the Prestige and all of these guys, like tearing it up like. There was that match about with Joe Hendry and Kurt Angle, if I remember
Yep.
correctly. It was insane. It was incredible.
Yeah, that was actually the same. That was the first live pay-per-view we did. And actually, I didn't commentate it because we had Jim Ross there. So I actually produced the commentators in their headsets because obviously, if JR's there, he's going to get the job. So I was involved in that one behind the scenes. But that was 2 days before we then went and did this huge show in an ice rink where I was commentating, and it was with Jim Cornette, and it was Angle and Cody in the main event. But yeah, I mean, Hendry, I think, is another really good example of a guy who obviously he's done a lot of stuff in ICW as well and elsewhere, What Culture was certainly a major platform for him, and he's someone who deserves his success as well, man, because he's like his work ethic is second to none. He's always thinking of like innovative ways that he can put himself out there and boost his profile, which is great. And more people need to do that. There's a lot of young wrestlers I think could learn from the way Joe Hendry promotes himself in terms of how to really kind of build yourself up.
You always should thrive to be not just yourself, but to be different in a way, because yeah, the audience isn't gonna care as much if you are the 500th guy that's doing some flips and waving to the crowd, and that's it. That's unfortunately that's not enough.
No, exactly. I mean, if you were going to say to me, would you rather have someone who is a little bit green in the ring but has natural charisma and is tremendous on the microphone, or would you rather have someone who's already great in the ring but doesn't seem to have any personality? Then I would far rather have the guy who's got the charisma, because I think the wrestling stuff they can improve on. The charisma stuff they can improve it, but you have to have some kind of natural basis there. And if you, then you're going to have a tremendous head start, because ultimately we're selling characters. We're telling stories. We're not just an acrobatic display. And most guys understand that. I'm not trying to criticize people who do high flying stuff. Most people realize that the high flying stuff is great, but it's got to fit into a story you're trying to tell.
Absolutely. And stories that WCPW has a lot of stories, great stories. And I remember Rampage Brown always ending up in these crazy, brutal matches. And do you have any match types or that happened on WCPW or Defined that you look back to?
Yeah, I mean, Rampage's stuff was incredible. I remember in the early days, he did what did he had that match with Adam Blompier, right? Who
Yes.
was, the general manager, and just, I mean, I remember seeing Adam back in the locker room before the match. Actually, it was the same show, the show that JR commentated. That was the one with Hendry against Angle, and Adam was absolutely terrified, as you should be if you're going to go in there against Rampage Brown. But no, he had some incredible stuff. I'm trying to think of match types in that that were unique to WCPW and Defy. And we had this match called the Magnificent Seven, which was a briefcase match like Money in the Bank, but without we did it without a ladder. So that was something. We had a variation on Rumble matches, but where you could also be pinned and submitted. So there were a few innovations there, but really the main innovation I think was definitely the sort of the integration of these YouTube guys with with established wrestlers on the independent scene. So people like Blompier and Adam Pacitti, Jack the Jobber, King Ross, Simon Miller, like all those guys who had built a name for themselves in a non-wrestling capacity on YouTube. So they kind of brought their fans with them when What Culture decided to open up a promotion. I think it was really smart, and I don't think anyone had done that. And I think that's probably why things skyrocketed so quickly.
Uh, Absolutely. I'm currently thinking of a name Rampage faced. I believe it was a hardcore match with some videotapes and Rory
Oh,
Coyle.
Rory Coyle, yeah.
Yes, that was great. I believe that was amazing and quite innovative for
Yeah,
Defiant.
Rory's really, really like intelligent, really innovative with his sort of promo style, very menacing, and yeah, he was one of those guys. He really was only there in the kind of the Defiant stage rather than the What Culture stage, but I think he was really a central part during that kind of latter half of the 3 years that the company was in existence.
But I hope we see more of him after this pandemic is over, because our feeling in Germany is like after the pandemic or when the pandemic begin, like immediately, almost immediately, the British indie scene just locked up and closed
Yeah,
its door. And in Germany, there was still some bubbling. Like everyone was trying to figure out what they can do. It wasn't completely dead. But in the UK, everything was just silent. And that was confusing to us because obviously the British scene is way, way bigger and has a lot more talent than Germany has. You have to say that. Yeah, we kind of continued from time to time, but the British indie scene, nothing.
Well, I mean, it depends entirely on what the government restrictions are in different countries. So we just haven't been allowed to have, large numbers of people, anything like a number of people that would merit, that would be profitable for a wrestling promoter in an indoor space. We haven't been allowed to do that for the past year. So really, the only companies who are able to run over here are ones who don't necessarily rely on a large live audience in order to run a show that works. So for example, Progress and ICW, because they're producing content for the WWE network like WXW does, they don't necessarily need a crowd because that's not where their revenue is coming from. If you see what I mean. Same with, and actually, there's a couple who aren't in that situation who have. I know Rev Pro, who are another big promotion over here. They've done a couple of shows without crowds because they're obviously counting on getting their money for that from their on-demand service. So there's a few companies who are big enough that they've been able to run something by putting their talent in a bubble and not relying on ticket revenue from a live crowd. But yeah, I mean, as big as the UK indie scene is, the vast majority of promotions over here do rely on that ticket revenue to run, and if they can't have that, then it's not worth them running a show, unfortunately.
Well, let's hope that soon it is somehow possible that shows can be run in the UK again, like with a crowd, maybe not a full crowd, but with distance, something like that. Of course, I believe I've some promotions say, we just can't work with full crowds. We don't want to have like just 40 people there. That doesn't feel right. I'd understand, but uh, maybe that's something you can look into after things have been eased out and relaxed a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the current plan here, it changes all the time, but the current plan is we have this four-step plan of how we're relaxing restrictions. And actually, to be fair, the UK is pretty ahead of the game on getting people vaccinated. So the idea is that the last of the restrictions will be lifted on June 21st, after which indoor gatherings without social distancing would be allowed. So there is a possibility that come July and August, the UK scene can start to try and rebuild and have crowds. But obviously, that's all totally dependent on whether the virus numbers go down in the way we hope they will.
I'm pressing the thumbs for the UK indie scene because but the thing you said, you are vaccinating is progress or program is working and in Germany it isn't. So we could be at the exact opposite of the spectrum in a few months time. Let's hope not, but uh, it could happen for some reason. I believe at the beginning of the pandemic, the United Kingdom people weren't satisfied with everything and how it was organized. And in Germany, were doing quite well, but now the roles are switched. So Germany is not doing everything well now. We have not ordered enough vaccines, for example. And the UK, you are actually slowly but steadily driving yourself out of the worst things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too political, but don't get
No.
me wrong. There's been a lot that I think the UK has not done very well at all during this pandemic. But credit where it's due. I think the the vaccine rollout has been pretty decent. And I don't know how much of that is due to the fact that the main vaccine we're using is the one from Oxford University, so it's from our own country, which makes things easier, I guess. I don't know, but for whatever reason, we are kind of ahead of the game. My parents and all their friends, all that age group, they've all been vaccinated now, and we're getting to a point where we're doing kind of people over 50 now, and I'm about to turn 38 in a couple of weeks, so I'm sort of in that 35 to 40 bracket. I'm hoping I'll be done in probably May. So we're getting there, but it's just slow, man. When you haven't had any live wrestling shows over here for a year, even having to wait till June for things to open up feels like it's an eternity away. but we'll get there.
Understandable. Um, but let's move away from this politics topic more to wrestling politics.
Mhm.
um, with, you are calling a lot of shows, indie wrestling and stuff, but are there any other shows you're watching, like from wrestling shows, outside of the ones you are calling?
Yeah, I keep my eye on the big promotions. Obviously, I watch some WWE, I watch some AEW. I think everyone I think has been very sort of creative in the way they've adapted to this new scenario over the past year. As an example, very early on, like most people, I think when WrestleMania was going to happen with in the Performance Center last year, and I had tickets to go to WrestleMania when it was going to be in a stadium, so I was like, I don't know if I want to watch this because it might just be really awful and depressing. But actually, watching 2 nights of WrestleMania was like the biggest morale boost I'd had in weeks, because they really kind of pulled it off. And then subsequently, what they've done with the Thunderdome and all that kind of stuff, I think has been great. So I love what they're doing. I think AEW continues to be really really exciting as well. So I mean, I think it's a great time to be a wrestling fan. You get a lot of negativity about from wrestling fans or from some wrestling fans on social media because that's what social media is like. I know, but overall, there's been worse times to be a wrestling fan. I think wrestling has probably helped me through this pandemic in a way that nothing else could have.
You're touching a very interesting topic there because while I was doing a bit of research about you, I found your pinned tweet that you have on your social media, and I, you are talking about mental health, and you're saying pro wrestling has helped you through this time. Is there anything you would like to share with us about mental health? And yeah, it, I guess it has been become even more important now during lockdown. And is there anything you would like to know? A note or share with us on that
I,
topic?
yeah, I think it's going to be recognized in years to come that the hidden pandemic, if you like, during this time was the mental health one. I know so many people who have really struggled through different parts of this. Not necessarily all the time. Like I was really struggling for maybe 6 weeks last summer, uh, and then I was kind of fine, mostly fine before and mostly fine afterwards. But it's important to talk about it because there's so many of us who struggle. Even those who I unfortunately have had a bit of a history of anxiety stuff through my the early years of my adulthood and stuff. I had that, but there's people who've never really had a problem who are finding problems during the pandemic. So whatever it is, like you can't sit there and suffer about it in silence. Like the one thing I can tell you 100% through my experiences is talking about it with someone is so much infinitely better. Getting it out of there so it's not just inside your brain, that you're actually articulating it to someone else, whether it's like a family member or a friend or a professional therapist, whichever way you feel comfortable doing it. But don't coop that stuff up and don't feel like you're somehow weak or inferior to other people because there are far more cases of this going on right now than people realize.
And fortunately, there are many places that are there for help, or at least can direct you to help. For example, WrestleTalk, they have this website, WrestleTalk support, where you can just check out which numbers you can go call from any country you're living in, and which website you can search for. So you can, and everyone at WrestleTalk, for example, has an open ear if you want to talk. Um, just do it. It's We are open to it. So that's something also very important to me because in and around me, there's also a lot of people struggling during this time. And yeah, as you say, it's a mental pandemic as well, just not the virus. And so talking helps. It really does. Thank you very
Yeah,
much for
I've
for
I've
sharing this.
seen. So I was just going to say I've seen more people struggling. It seems like through this winter than through the first kind of round of lockdowns last spring. So don't feel like oh I should be doing better with this now because we've been doing this for a year. That's not how mental health works either. So it doesn't. it's I know it's a cliched sentence, but it's okay to not feel okay, and you need to try and figure that out and talk to someone if that's how you're feeling, because it will get better. We just need to carry on through until it does.
Absolutely. And I just mentioned WrestleTalk, and you've been a host for the Challenge TV show, if anyone remembers. And now you're writing for the magazine. And before we, as an audience, actually knew that you are back writing for the magazine now, you've done an interview with Luke Owen about LGBTQ plus in pro wrestling. And my question is here: how did this came about? How did you choose WrestleTalk? Did they come to you? What was the process there?
Well, WrestleTalk Magazine asked me if I'd like to do some writing for them, because I've done some magazine writing before. I used to write for Fighting Spirit magazine, which is now defunct here, but that used to be one of the top magazines in the country. But I did some stuff for them a few years ago, and then WrestleTalk were like, "Do you want to do some articles for us?" And this was in September last year maybe, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll do anything because we're in the pandemic. I just wanted to do some wrestling stuff. So I started writing for them, yeah, about 6 months ago, and I did 2 or 3 articles on different subjects, and then just in the process of thinking about what kind of topics might be good for articles, it was my idea. I had the idea of what if I talked about the history of LGBTQ representation in wrestling, and they were really open to it, which I think is immensely to their credit, because it's not necessarily it's not a light-hearted read. It's not the kind of thing that it's not just like, oh, have a review of last month's pay-per-view. It's obviously a more serious topic, but we decided to go with it, and it was important for me as well, because I'm gay, and I've been out in my personal life to my friends and most of my friends and family for over a decade, but I'd never really told anyone, other than a few very close friends in the industry. I'd never really told anyone about my own sexuality, and I thought, well, if I'm going to write an article about it, I think it makes sense to explain the perspective that I'm coming at it from. So I did that, and actually, interestingly, I didn't think it would be that big of a deal, because I'm like, oh, I'm already out in my personal life. It's not that. It felt like I'd already done 90% of the coming out process, but then to do that and to see the response it got online, I had so many like lovely messages from people within the industry and from fans and all that kind of stuff, that I realized afterwards that actually to talk about my own situation in that way was kind of a weight off my shoulders that I didn't even realize was on my shoulders. So it was a really, really uplifting thing, and I'm really glad I did it.
It sounds absolutely wonderful, and especially yeah, how the reaction was from everyone I've seen online, and it's just very touching, because you always get told by social media that the pro wrestling fans, they are all angry all the time, they hate everything that's presented to them, but when it matters, they can really stick around like a family and lift you up and be there, and it's crazy. And so it was absolutely wonderful to read all of these messages, and uh, actually for you to take this step. Very wonderful stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I tried to make it as well a positive article about the industry. There's a lot of negative in there, because I'm talking about some pretty bad, dark stuff that happened in various promotions throughout the past few decades. But I do also say, and I hope this comes through in that article, that things have got a lot better, both for fans who are watching it who might be LGBTQ or who are questioning their sexuality, and also for performers. I think the whole industry is a lot more inclusive now than it would have been a while ago. And in some ways, I think wrestling is ahead of the curve compared to other sports and other entertainment industries when it comes to how welcoming it is. And the reaction I got to my own article is just one tiny example of that. We're a very welcoming place now. Well, that's my experience. I can't speak for everyone else. I know there's been some people who've had, not just about their sexuality, but who've had unpleasant experiences in wrestling. But mine is a good news story. Mine is a story that it's been a positive experience, and things are definitely trending in the right direction in terms of that stuff.
I remember reading the book of Goldust, the autobiography, um, and he was telling the stories about the gimmick coming up first in the early 90s, the Goldust character, and of course maybe the character itself was a bit too much into your face, but people were like really angry and writing letters to WWE to please stop this gimmick, and were he was a heel by touching men. That was the thing, and it was a bit awkward, but that was the times in the 90s, unfortunately.
Yeah, my view of the Goldust character personally was that it was a negative thing. Looking back, I didn't care at the time. I was only a teenager at the time, but like looking back at it now, I kind of think, oh man, that wasn't very helpful in terms of stereotypes and all that. But interestingly, I spoke to a couple of other LGBTQ people within the industry, a couple of wrestlers, and one of them, Ollie Burns, who does the gimmick of Priscilla, Queen of the Ring here in the UK, said that Goldust was an important character for him because it was the first time he realized that it was possible to have that kind of persona that Goldust has and still be a badass who can kick people's asses. So it was I'd never really looked at the character that way, but that was an educational experience for me as well, to see that not everyone perceives different characters in the way that I might. So it's a really really interesting topic to get into.
Yeah, I'm personally, I believe a lot of people that are listening to this podcast right now know that I'm like the biggest Goldust fan.
Hmm.
But the thing is, the character has more facets than just this. What Vince McMahon used to call bizarre, because you can't say gay, you have to call it bizarre or flamboyant or something for some reason, and that was that there's that part, but there was always the movie character and the characteristics and the mind games. So there was a lot more to it than just the problematic stuff that for some people is problematic. For others, it was an inspiration. So yeah, he's, as you said, a very interesting topic to dive into, because it's not all bad, but it's not all good at the same time.
No, I mean, I will say about Goldust that he, as you say, he was a much more layered and deep character than a lot of what was in WWF or anywhere in pro wrestling in the mid 90s. That idea that there was this intrigue about, well, why does he act that way? Is he really quote unquote bizarre, by which they meant gay? Or is it just mind games? Like, what's his obsession with movies? There were what's his relationship with Marlena, his director? So it was an interesting character. I'm not saying it was all bad. I think sometimes when people get into these discussions, they feel like they have to say something was all bad or all good. There's nuance there, obviously, and there's some good parts and there's some bad parts. For me, some of the way the character was then, and this is nothing against Dustin Rhodes, it's not his fault, but the way the character was then treated, where in order to turn babyface, he had to clarify that he was straight. That was very common in those times, and I don't think that was particularly helpful. But some of the things about that character, yeah, they're really interesting.
Um, yeah, so we've talked now a lot about WrestleTalk, but you didn't just do one article. You're now a part of the magazine team, and you are releasing new articles every month as part of the magazine. So the question is, when is the next magazine coming out, and can you give us any tease on what's coming to us?
I think it's out this week. I think, and it's this coming month will be 20 years since WrestleMania 17, which some people remember as the best WrestleMania of all time. So I was at WrestleMania 17 as an 18-year-old. I won tickets, which was quite the lucky thing to happen. And so I've done a kind of a retrospective on on what it was like to be there as an 18-year-old English kid, and whether looking back, was it really the best WrestleMania of all time? Certainly one of the most consequential, happened at one of the most important moments in wrestling history, in that it was the same week that WWF bought out WCW. But and then the Austin heel turn in the main event and all those things that happened make it a very important WrestleMania. But is it really as good as people remember it? What was it like to attend? All those kind of things. So I've done a whole article on that this month.
I'm looking forward to reading it, because, like, of course, yeah, and that's uh, yeah, it's like you're kind of biased because for some people it was a childhood and you remember it fondly. But if you would watch it with your take off the pink glasses and watch it with your adult eyes and review it then, you would say, maybe it wasn't that great. It's interesting because, for example, um, on WrestleTalk, there is this WrestleTalk Extra podcast for Patreon fans, and every month there is a historic pay-per-view that Ollie and Luke review. And I was adamant for years now that they would do WrestleMania 26 because that was my first WrestleMania. And when they finally got to it, I realized not everything about the show was fantastic. Certainly not.
Yeah, people get very starry-eyed and nostalgic about WrestleManias, which I understand. I do as well. I do it for some of the ones from when I was first a fan. I think that WrestleMania 8 is awesome and underrated because that was my first WrestleMania, and some people think that's one of the worst ones. And I look back at it and I'm like, yeah, okay. I mean, I can see why if you don't have the nostalgia thing there, then maybe you don't see it in the same way I do. But I maintain, by the way, that Randy Savage against Ric Flair for the world title in that show is one of the great WrestleMania world title matches.
I mean, Ric Flair, maybe after 2010, yes, or after 2008, but pre that, I believe Ric Flair was incapable of having a bad match.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who they say he could wrestle a broom, right? And that was his job. It was not literally wrestling a broom, but it was his job for a long time when he was NWA champion in the 80s. It was 70s as well. It was to his job was to go around all the different territories as a heel champion and make their champion, however talent, make their like top baby face in each territory, however talented that person might have been, make them look like a star before somehow clinging on to the championship. That was his role, and he's proven over decades to be arguably the best of all time at doing that.
Yeah, and his influence still reaches through today. Not just Charlotte Flair, which is the obvious thing, the obvious person to go to, but there are people using the figure for a leg lock. There are the Four Horsemen are still a thing in wrestling, and he's like, and there are rap songs about him, so he's still in the pop culture, and he's still relevant because he just maintained his style and his greatness for such a long time. It's he just impacted so many people in the business and outside of the business. Like Snoop Dogg has called him one of them, and it's he's just he just he's just a legend, really a legend. Like this term gets thrown around a lot, but Ric Flair, he's like up there, I would say.
I met him once. Do you want to know the story of how I met him?
Of course.
It's a good story. Like this was 2008, and I just started commentating, and I was just wanting to do whatever I could to go to shows, and so there was a show being put on. This was the autumn of 2008, so it's about 6 months after his retirement match with Shawn Michaels, and there was a promotion here in the UK that used to do big shows back then called 1PW, and they were running a big show up in Yorkshire somewhere, and the guy who I was doing a lot of commentating for was running the production for it or something. He said, "Do you want to come to Doncaster, the town where it was, with me for the show? I mean, you can't commentate; they have commentators, but do you want to come?" I was like, "Yeah, I'll come." So in the end, I ended up operating the smoke machine. I just sat behind the stage, pressing the button to let the smoke out, which was cool. I was like, "Hey, I'm still here at a wrestling show, doing it for free." And anyway, I went to the bathroom during the interval, in the locker room area, not the public bathroom, and I was just like peeing at the urinal. And then as I turned around from washing my hands, there's this hand sticking out. He says, "Hey, I'm Ric Flair. Nice to meet you." And I still had wet hands, from washing my hands. So I shake his hand with this wet hand, and he gives me this look like, that better not be urine. And it wasn't. It was water. But I just hadn't dried my hands. But I was like, I just said, "Hi, I'm Dave. I'm a really big fan," or something. And then I kind of just ran out of the room. And that was when I met Ric Flair. And that's the only time ever.
So maybe sometimes he thinks better of that British guy with the wet hands.
Yeah, he probably remembers me to this day.
Yeah, probably. That's a great story. And I believe, yeah, that's a great story to end on, actually, I would say. If there's not anything you want to add, I would gladly ask you to now. You are now invited to tell everyone where they can find you, of course, on WXW now, but where else? What's your social media? And what are you up to next?
Well, yeah, WXW's Wheel of Wrestling is coming out every week. It's on Fridays, 7 o'clock UK time, 8 p.m. Central European time. And as you say, that's on WXWnow.com, which is our on-demand service. So I encourage everyone to check that out. In terms of my stuff, you can catch me on social media, on Twitter at Dave Bradshaw, Instagram and Facebook, I'm at Dave Bradshaw83. I have a website as well, which is davebradshaw.tv. Yeah, that's it. So check me out. And obviously I'm doing WXW right now, and I hope to continue to do that for a long time. But there's other promotions I do throughout Europe. I do GWF in Berlin, HCW in Budapest, and then various ones here in the UK. You mentioned NGW. I have been doing WrestleGate and Frontline. There's a couple of new ones I'm going to be doing when the pandemic ends, called Wrestle Carnival and Riot Cabaret. So there's plenty of stuff going on. It's just, we just need these restrictions to end, and as soon as they do, I'm hoping to be a busy man.
Wonderful. It has been a great pleasure to talk with you today. I've been looking forward to this for actually longer than I've invited you, because you've done work for WrestleTalk, and we are kind of involved and blessed to be involved with WXW now as a podcast. So I think we had it coming for quite some time, and now you are here.
Oh, it's fun talking to you. A pleasure, and I hope you continue to enjoy what's coming up on WXW in the next few weeks.
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I just want to find out who the number one contender to Bobby Guns is.
You don't have long to wait, I'll promise you.
That's next week. Okay, thank you so much. Of course, I wish everyone that's been listening to this a very nice day, evening, morning, whenever you're listening to this. And as always, the final words belong to our guest.
Oh, well, thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. And please do keep on listening and watching WXW and all the other stuff. Keep on reading WrestleTalk Magazine. And it's a pleasure to be able to keep bringing you all this stuff that we do during these continuing difficult times.